Ben Carter had always thought of himself as a man of reason, a person who believed in science and facts. He spent most of his life working as an archaeologist, digging through ancient ruins and studying forgotten histories. He had no interest in legends or myths, always dismissing them as fantasies. But that was before he found the sword. It all started with an excavation project in the middle of Nevada's vast desert. Ben had been hired to lead a team of archaeologists to investigate what appeared to be the remains of an ancient city buried beneath the sand. The ruins had been hidden for centuries, forgotten by time and history. No one knew how old they were, but there was a sense that something significant was buried there. As they dug deeper into the dry earth, Ben and his team uncovered walls, carvings, and strange symbols they had never seen before. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that this place was not like anything they had encountered before. It was too advanced for the time it was supposed to be from, and the designs didn't match any known culture. Ben's curiosity grew stronger with every passing day. Then, one afternoon, after hours of careful digging, something caught his eye. Beneath a pile of rocks, hidden in a small chamber, lay a large stone pedestal. On it was a long, curved sword. Its metal blade shimmered faintly, even in the dim light of the underground space. The hilt was wrapped in strange materials, with intricate patterns carved into it. It looked ancient, but also unlike any weapon he had ever seen. The team gathered around, their eyes wide with excitement. Ben was the first to reach for the sword. He had no idea why, but something inside him urged him to touch it. As his fingers brushed against the hilt, a sharp jolt of energy shot through his body. His vision blurred for a moment, and his heart raced. The sword hummed in his hand as though it was alive, its power coursing through him. The rest of the team looked on in awe. They didn't know what to make of it. Ben, still feeling the strange pulse of energy from the sword, took a deep breath and steadied himself. He felt stronger, more aware of his surroundings, but also different. Something was shifting inside him, as if the sword was trying to communicate with him. "Ben, are you okay?" asked Rachel, one of his fellow archaeologists. She was a sharp-minded woman with an adventurous spirit. She could see the change in his eyes, the way his muscles tensed, as though he had just discovered something far more significant than any artifact they had ever unearthed. I don't know," Ben replied, his voice shaky. "Something's happening. I think this sword, gets connected to me in some way. I can feel it." Rachel frowned, but before she could ask anything further, Ben shook his head. "We need to take this back to the lab. There's more to this than we realize." Right. The team carefully packed up the sword and began making their way back to the surface. As they emerged from the chamber, the desert air felt heavier than before. The sky above seemed darker, more oppressive. Ben's mind raced, but he couldn't focus on anything except the sword. He couldn't explain it, but it was as if the weapon had awakened something inside him, something ancient and powerful. That night, after the team set up camp, Ben sat alone by the fire, staring at the sword. He couldn't stop thinking about the strange feeling that had overtaken him when he first touched it. It was as though he had unlocked a hidden power inside himself, a power that was now starting to take control. Just as Ben was lost in thought, Rachel came over and sat beside him. "Do you think it could be from a lost civilization?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Ben looked at the sword again. "It's possible. It's more than just an artifact. I feel like it's meant for something bigger. And whatever that is, we're about to find out." As he said the words, a strange noise echoed through the desert, a low hum that seemed to come from far away. Ben's heart skipped a beat. It was almost as if the sword had responded, calling out to something or someone. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far larger than he could ever imagine. But one thing was certain. Whatever was coming, it had found him. The next few days after Ben found the sword felt different. The air seemed heavier, and the world around him felt more uncertain. He couldn't shake the strange energy that still pulsed from the blade. The team had returned to the nearby town to prepare for their journey back to their main research base, but Ben couldn't stop thinking about the sword. It was as if it had become a part of him. At night, he would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. He saw flashes of battles, huge armies clashing in strange landscapes. He didn't understand why, but it felt real. The sword hummed in his dreams, urging him to take action. Rachel, who had been his closest friend and colleague for years, noticed the change in him. She could see the way he moved with more purpose now, the way his eyes were always distant, as if looking for something beyond what was in front of him.
Ow.
"Ben, you need to rest," she said one evening, as they sat by the campfire. The others were asleep, but Rachel knew something was wrong. "You're not the same. It's like you're—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Like you're being pulled somewhere." Ben didn't answer right away. He stared at the sword, now lying across his lap. He had been trying to ignore the feeling that it was calling to him. But the truth was that he couldn't. There was something deep within the sword, something old and powerful, and it was awakening in him. "I don't know what's happening," he said quietly, "but I can feel it. The sword isn't just a relic. It's alive, in some way. I think it's trying to tell me something. Or maybe it's trying to use me." Rachel looked at him with concern. "What do you mean? How could it be using you?" Ben swallowed hard. "I don't understand it fully, but I think it's connected to something much bigger. Maybe it's a signal, or maybe it's meant for me. I don't know. But I feel like I'm supposed to take it somewhere." Rachel didn't know what to say. Ben had always been practical, always grounded in logic. For him to speak like this, it made her uneasy. She wasn't sure whether to believe him, but the look in his eyes told her that something had changed. The sword wasn't just an object. It was something else, something beyond their understanding. "Where do you think you're supposed to take it?" Rachel asked, her voice soft. "I don't know," Ben replied, his voice distant. "But I think the sword has a purpose. A purpose I'm supposed to fulfill." Rachel shook her head slowly, trying to make sense of it all. "This is crazy, Ben. We've already seen so much more than we expected. This," she pointed at the sword, "this is something else. Act." Ben stood up, holding the sword tightly in his hands. The blade seemed to glow faintly, as if it was alive, and Ben could feel the weight of it pulling him towards something. He wasn't sure what, but he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. The next morning, the team packed up to leave the desert and return to their base, but Ben's mind was elsewhere. He had decided that he would go to a nearby mountain range that was known for being a place of old ruins. He felt drawn to it, like the sword had guided him there. He couldn't explain why, but he knew it was the next step. "I'm going to the mountains," Ben told Rachel as they walked to the trucks. "I have to. The sword is leading me there." Rachel hesitated. She knew she couldn't talk him out of it. She had never seen Ben so sure of something in his life. And she wasn't sure whether to be worried or impressed by his determination. But she knew she had to go with him. She couldn't leave him alone in this strange situation, especially with what they had already discovered. "Then I'm coming with you," she said, looking him in the eyes. Ben nodded without hesitation. He had expected as much. Rachel had always been by his side, and this time wouldn't be any different. The team left the desert and drove toward the mountain range. As they made their way into the rugged terrain, Ben felt the sword's pull growing stronger. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark and imposing, like giants watching over the land. Ben couldn't explain it, but it felt like the sword was calling him home. As the hours passed, Ben and Rachel drove in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The world outside seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the hills, when they finally arrived at the base of the mountains. Ben got out of the truck and stood for a moment, staring up at the jagged peaks. The sword in his hand vibrated gently, almost like a heartbeat. He knew they had arrived. The journey was only beginning, and the path ahead would not be easy. But one thing was certain. Whatever the sword wanted, he was ready to face it. The mountains loomed in front of Ben and Rachel as they made their way up the narrow trail. The air was thin, and the sky above them seemed endless. Ben held the sword tightly, its presence felt with every step he took. It was as if the weapon was guiding him, pulling him towards something he couldn't yet understand. Rachel walked beside him, her boots crunching against the rocky ground. She could see the change in Ben. He was no longer the calm, logical archaeologist she had worked with for years. Something in him had shifted, and now he was driven by an unknown force. She had never seen him so focused, and it made her uneasy. The sword wasn't just an artifact anymore. It had become a part of him. "Ben," Rachel said, breaking the silence. "What do you think we're going to find here? What's so special about this place?" Ben didn't answer right away. was too focused on the path ahead, his eyes scanning the terrain as if he was looking for something. The sword pulsed in his hand, its glow faint but constant. He felt the pull growing stronger with each step. He didn't know what he was supposed to find, but he knew this was the right place. The sword was guiding him, and he couldn't ignore it. "I don't know," he finally replied, his voice low. "But I feel like something's waiting for us here. Something important." Rachel frowned but said nothing more. She had learned long ago not to question Ben when he was this sure of something. She had seen him make discoveries that others would have dismissed as impossible, but this was different. This wasn't about history or facts. It was about something much larger, something that Ben didn't fully understand yet. As they reached the top of the hill, they paused to catch their breath. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting a golden light over the land below. Ben looked around, his eyes scanning the area. The landscape was wild and untouched, with jagged rocks and thick trees stretching far in every direction. But in the distance, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. There, hidden among the trees, was a large stone structure. It was ancient, covered in moss and vines, but there was no mistaking it. It was a temple, or at least the remains of one. Ben's heart raced as he realized what it was. This was what the sword had been leading him to. "This is it," Ben said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is what we've been looking for." Rachel followed his gaze and saw the temple.
Ow.
She could feel the same pull that Ben had been feeling, though she didn't understand why. She had never believed in destiny or fate, but something about this place made her question everything. They walked toward the temple, carefully making their way through the dense trees. The closer they got, the more the sword seemed to hum with energy. Ben could feel the power growing stronger, as though the temple itself was alive and waiting for them. As they entered the temple, the air grew colder. The walls were lined with strange carvings, symbols that Ben had never seen before. Some were familiar, but many were completely alien. It was as if this place existed outside of time, a forgotten relic of a civilization that had long since vanished. In the center of the temple was a large stone altar, and on it, an empty pedestal. It was clear that something had once rested there, but whatever it was had long since disappeared. Ben stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt the sword pulling him closer to the altar, as if it recognized the place. "This is where it all begins," Ben muttered to himself. Rachel looked at him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Ben didn't answer right away. He placed the sword on the pedestal, and as soon as he did, the room seemed to tremble. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, and the air became thick with energy. Ben's body tingled with power, and the sword glowed brighter than ever before. A deep rumble echoed through the temple, and suddenly the walls began to shift. Ben stumbled back, his eyes wide in shock. The stone walls groaned as they parted, revealing a hidden passageway. The path ahead was dark, but Ben knew that it was the way forward. "Ben, what's happening?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Ben replied, his eyes fixed on the passage. "But I think it's time. The sword. It's unlocking something. Something we were never meant to find." Rachel grabbed Ben's arm. "We should leave. This place feels wrong." Ben shook his head, his grip tightening around the sword. "No, we can't leave now. This is what we came for." With that, he stepped forward into the dark passageway. Rachel hesitated but followed him. The air was thick with a strange energy, and every step they took seemed to echo in the silence. The deeper they went, the more the sword pulsed, its light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. As they reached the end of the tunnel, they found themselves standing in a vast chamber. In the center of the room stood a massive stone structure, covered in strange markings. It was unlike anything Ben had ever seen. The sword thrummed with power as if recognizing the structure. Ben stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat. He knew that whatever was about to happen, it would change everything. The sword had led him here for a reason, and he was ready to find out why. The chamber was massive, much larger than Ben had expected. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, but the most striking feature was the large stone structure in the center of the room. It was like a giant archway, but there was no way through it. Instead, it seemed like the structure was made to hold something, like it was waiting for a key. Ben felt the sword in his hand grow warm, the pulsing energy almost becoming a beat, like a heartbeat. He couldn't explain it, but the sword seemed to recognize the structure in front of him. It was as if it knew what it needed to do next. He stepped closer to the stone archway, his feet echoing on the cold stone floor. "Ben, this place feels wrong," Rachel whispered from behind him. She stayed close, her eyes wide as she took in the chamber. There was something about the silence that made her uneasy, like the whole place was holding its breath. "I know," Ben replied, but his voice was steady. He didn't understand why, but he felt drawn to the structure, like the sword had brought him here for a reason. The sword was more than just a weapon. Now it was a guide, and it was telling him to do something. He just didn't know what. He stepped closer to the archway, his fingers brushing against the stone. Suddenly, the sword in his hand flared with light. It was blinding, the glow brighter than ever before, and Ben felt a sharp surge of power. The floor beneath him trembled, and the carvings on the walls began to shift. The room came alive as the stones groaned and moved like the temple itself was waking up. Rachel gasped and backed away. "Ben, what's happening?" Ben couldn't answer. The sword was guiding him now, its pull stronger than anything he had felt before. The stone structure in front of him began to change. The archway shifted, its surface crumbling and revealing something hidden behind it. The air around them thickened with energy, and Ben could feel it wrapping around him, urging him forward. Without thinking, Ben stepped into the center of the archway. As soon as he did, the energy in the room exploded, and the floor beneath him cracked open. He staggered, nearly losing his balance, but the sword kept him steady. Cracks in the ground spread wider, revealing a dark pit below. Ben took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His heart pounded in his chest. Whatever was coming, he knew there was no turning back now. The sword was leading him, and he had no choice but to follow. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the chamber. The ground trembled, and a low hum filled the air. The sound seemed to come from everywhere, and it made the walls shake. Ben looked up and saw something he hadn't expected. The structure was opening, revealing a set of stairs leading down into the darkness. "It's a doorway," Rachel said, her voice shaky. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes fixed on the stairs. "We have to go down there, don't we?" Ben nodded. He didn't know what awaited them, but he knew they had to keep moving. There was something important at the bottom of those stairs, something that the sword was trying to show him. The stairs were steep and narrow, and as they descended, the air grew colder. The glow from the sword lit the way, casting long shadows on the stone walls. The deeper they went, the more Ben felt the weight of the sword. It was like a call, one that was impossible to ignore. They reached the bottom, and Ben looked around. The room was different from the one they had just left. This one felt older, more ancient. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint light. In the center of the room was a large stone pedestal, and on it, something that made Ben's breath catch in his throat. It was a sword, but it wasn't just any sword. This one was different. It was larger, more ornate, and its blade shimmered with a strange, otherworldly glow. It looked like the same kind of weapon as the one Ben had found, but this one felt more powerful. It was as if it was waiting for him. The sword in Ben's hand pulsed again, reacting to the one on the pedestal. Ben's heart raced, didn't know what to do, but everything inside him told him this was the moment. He stepped forward, reaching out to take the sword. As soon as his fingers brushed against the blade, the room erupted in light. The walls shook, and the ground trembled beneath them. The two swords connected, their energy merging together, and Ben felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. His body was flooded with strength, but it was also more than that. He felt connected to something much older, something much bigger. "Ben, what is this?" Rachel asked, her voice filled with awe and fear. Ben couldn't answer. The power from the two swords was overwhelming, and he felt like he was being pulled into a vision. Saw images flashing before his eyes, great battles, ancient warriors in a war that spanned the stars. He saw a woman, a queen, standing at the center of it all, leading armies across worlds. The vision faded, and Ben was left standing in the chamber, his hands still holding the two swords. He took a shaky breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it had only just begun. Ben stood in the center of the chamber, the two swords in his hands pulsing with energy. He could still feel the rush of power flowing through him, but it wasn't just power, it was something more, something ancient. He could hear whispers in his mind, distant voices that spoke a language he didn't understand. But even without the words, he felt a connection to them. To this place. To the sword. Rachel stood a few steps behind him, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She had never seen Ben like this before, and the change in him scared her. He wasn't just holding the swords anymore, he was becoming a part of them. Ben. Are you all right? Rachel asked, her voice shaking. She had seen Ben do many things, but this was different. He was different. Ben didn't answer right away. He was still trying to make sense of what had just happened. The vision had been so clear, so real. He saw the Queen, a powerful woman leading an army of warriors. But it wasn't just a vision of the past. It was something that was still happening, something that was still alive. Suddenly the ground shook, and the walls of the chamber trembled. Ben snapped out of his thoughts, his heart pounding. The swords in his hands vibrated, and he felt the power grow stronger. Ben, we need to get out of here, Rachel said urgently, her eyes darting around the room. The walls were shifting, and the air was getting thicker, heavier. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. Ben didn't move, was still holding the swords, but now he felt them pulling him toward the center of the room. The whispers in his mind grew louder, clearer. They were not just voices anymore, they were commands. He didn't know why, but he knew he had to listen to them. He had to follow the path that the swords had set before him. No, Ben said softly. Can't leave. This is where we're supposed to be. Rachel's eyes widened. Ben, this isn't right. Whatever this is, it's dangerous. But Ben didn't listen. He could feel the pull of the swords, the urge to step forward. The vision was still fresh in his mind. The Queen. The war. Everything was connected. The swords weren't just weapons, they were keys. Keys to something much larger than he could understand. Something that was waiting to be unlocked. The floor beneath them cracked open, and a dark, swirling portal appeared in the center of the room. Ben felt the swords resonate with the energy from the portal, and he stepped forward, drawn by an invisible force. Ben, stop. Rachel shouted, reaching out to grab his arm. This is madness. But Ben pulled away, his gaze fixed on the portal. I have to do this. I don't know why, but I do. With that, he stepped into the portal, feeling the swords pull him deeper into the darkness. Rachel hesitated for a moment, fear and doubt flooding her thoughts. But she couldn't leave him. She couldn't let him go alone. So, with one last look at the chamber, she followed him into the unknown. The world around them twisted and shifted, and for a moment it felt like they were falling. Time seemed to stretch and bend as the portal pulled them forward. Ben's mind raced. Where was this leading them? What had he just set in motion? Suddenly, everything stopped. They landed with a heavy thud on solid ground, and the world around them came into focus. They were no longer in the ancient temple. Instead, they found themselves standing in the middle of a vast ruined city. The sky above them was dark, swirling with storm clouds, and the air was thick with smoke. The ground was littered with broken stones, and in the distance, Ben could see the remnants of a battlefield. Rachel gasped, her hand on Ben's shoulder. Where are we? Ben looked around, his heart racing. He didn't have an answer. But he knew one thing for sure. This place was where the vision had taken him. This was the war. It's a battle between the Queen and her enemies. And somehow, he was a part of it now. In the distance, he could see soldiers preparing for battle. They wore ancient armor and carried weapons like the one Ben had found. But it wasn't just the weapons that caught his attention. It was the faces of the soldiers. They were human, just like him. And among them, standing tall and proud, was a woman. A queen. Her presence was powerful, almost like a force of nature. She was the one from Ben's vision, the leader of the army. Ben felt a strange connection to her, like he had known her all his life. The swords in his hands pulsed again, and he realized something. He was meant to help her. He was meant to fight in this war. Rachel noticed the change in Ben. She saw the way his eyes locked onto the Queen, the way his body tensed as if he was ready to join the fight. Ben, we can't just walk into this. We don't even know what's going on. But Ben's mind was already made up. I have to be here, Rachel. This is why I found the sword. It's not just a weapon, it's a calling. We have to fight. Without waiting for her response, Ben moved toward the Queen's army. Rachel followed reluctantly, unsure of what was happening, but she couldn't leave him. She didn't know what the future held, but it was clear that their journey was far from over, and the war had just begun.